The Queen's Diamond Jubilee visit has come to an end with an open-air party for the public. But it was another event which had the greatest political and historic resonance today. An unprecedented meeting and shaking of hands between Martin McGuinness, a lifelong Republican and former IRA leader, and the Queen, the monarch and Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces. In fact, there were two handshakes, one in private followed by one in public. Our political editor Mark Devonport has the story of that remarkable meeting.
An ordinary act of politeness, but one invested with enormous symbolism. A handshake which took 4 seconds, yet which could mark a new passage in 40 years of history. Back in the 1970s, Martin McGuinness was an IRA commander in Londonderry. In that same decade, the royal family mourned the loss of the Queen's cousin, Earl Mountbatten, murdered by a remote-control IRA bomb. Today, the Deputy First Minister exchanged pleasantries with the Queen as she left the Lyric Theatre. Slán agus beannacht, the Deputy First Minister said, telling the Queen his Irish words meant goodbye and Godspeed.
It went really well, yeah. I'm still a Republican.
Martin, how was it to meet the Queen?
Very nice.
Before their parting handshake, the royal couple were shown around the theatre by the BBC's Mark Carruthers in his role as chair of the Lyric. With the First and Deputy First Ministers and the Irish President for company, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh examined portraits of leading local artists and chatted to some of those featured on the canvases. Sinn Féin say Mr McGuinness told the Queen the fact they were able to meet was a powerful signal that peace-building requires leadership. The First Minister briefly took centre stage, showing the royal couple Stormont's official Diamond Jubilee gift, a Belique pottery basket. The cameras weren't allowed to record any sound, but the Queen appeared relaxed, whilst the Duke of Edinburgh seemed keen to hurry on with the agreed schedule. Later, the First Minister put the events of the day in context.
Well, I think it is significant. It's a further taboo that's been cast to the side. It shows that we're becoming a normal society where the like of a handshake shouldn't be something that is unusual or unexpected. It was carried out in a very respectful and dignified way, and there was a pleasant conversation, and then we went on with our business.
So the first public handshake for Martin McGuinness and the Queen becomes potentially the last and most significant bit of handshake diplomacy during the political process. Mark Devonport, BBC Newsline.
Important as it was, the handshake made up only a part of the Queen's Jubilee visit today. Sarah is at Stormont. Sarah.
Well, Donna, thank goodness the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh weren't arriving now, because the heavens have absolutely opened and there's thunder and lightning here. It would have been a complete washout for the 20,000 or so people who packed out the Stormont estate earlier. They're long gone now, thankfully. But they were delighted when they saw the Queen and the Duke tour the V behind Lord Carson's statue in an open-topped car. It really was quite a spectacle. And it's been such a busy day for the Queen. Earlier she also took a trip to Titanic Belfast. Julian O'Neill looks back at the day.
The Queen and the Titanic, twin icons of the 20th century. The royal party was given a guided tour of life on board the luxury liner. The shipyard ride rolled into action, taking the Queen and the Duke back in time to the heyday of Harland and Wolff. Since it opened in March, this was the attraction's finest hour.
Once in a lifetime opportunity to meet somebody so important, the reigning monarch on her Jubilee. So it's just, it'll never happen again, and I think I'm more nervous today than I am on my wedding day.
Behind the scenes, the Queen met Ian Paisley,
Lord Banside,
telling the former First Minister it's very nice to be here. Other guests included some bereaved through violence, like the widow of Constable Stephen Carroll, killed by the Continuity IRA.
She seemed to care, you know, she had a lot of caring in her. It was just, I just can't, it's so surreal, I just can't imagine that I've met the Queen of England and her husband, you know.
Snapping a salute was John Leishman.
I remember you.
The 92-year-old D-Day veteran told the Queen she had once changed the spark plugs on his car while in the Auxiliary Territorial Service during the war.
And you had dungarees on you. And you got a marvelous job. Yeah. And God bless. I've had two things in my life which are very important. The day I got married and the day I met the Queen. I couldn't wish for anything better. No, she's a wonderful woman, and may the Lord keep her in healthy years from now until she's 100. I told her, I said, Ma'am, you and I'll get to 100. She said, how old are you? I said, just 92. Oh, she said, I'm a little younger. I said, well, I'll wait for you.
20,000 well-wishers were at Stormont for the royal send-off. This was the wave goodbye to the two-day visit, and the atmosphere was one of celebration. The walkabout was brief and confined to a few of the dignitaries. Stormont's mile-long drive provided a slow exit. This had been the Queen's 20th visit to Northern Ireland, and it ended on a high. Julian O'Neill, BBC News Now.
Much better weather then, and we'll hear in a short while from some of the people who were picnicking and in the crowds cheering on the Queen today. Well, also at Stormont today, the First Minister Peter Robinson, who welcomed the Queen along with his wife Iris. But we know that the First Minister was also at that historic handshake which took place earlier at the Lyric between the Deputy First Minister and the Queen. In fact, the First Minister told me it was up to him to introduce the Deputy First Minister to the Queen. So I asked him, did he ever think 20 years ago he would see a day where he would be standing alongside a Sinn Féin Deputy First Minister and introducing him to the British monarch?
Well, 20 years ago you couldn't have had an event like this. The Queen couldn't have announced her coming. You certainly wouldn't have had a Sinn Féin representative meeting Her Majesty and His Royal Highness. So it's very different days and shows how much we've moved on.
How would you describe the mood around the handshake?
It was all carried out in a very convivial way. It wasn't done in any begrudging fashion on either side, because don't forget, and I keep repeating this issue, the cruel hand of Northern Ireland history has touched the royal family, and it was a hard issue for them to come to terms with as well.
Did you recognise it was perhaps a difficult thing for the Deputy First Minister to do?
I think we have to recognise that for a Republican, but Martin McGuinness left the Lyric Theatre as much of a Republican as he was when he entered it. It doesn't diminish your beliefs simply because you shake hands with someone. I think in this day and age people recognise that that's a matter of an introductory salutation.
However, the world's media cameras were on that particular event, so there is great interest in what happened this morning.
Well, clearly, but I think it's more of an interest with the press than it is with the public. The real event, the most important event, was the event that was held here and the event that was held at Titanic, where we are here to celebrate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, 60 years of tremendous service to this nation. That's the important message for today, and I think that far overshadows any other issue that took place during the course of the visit, important though it was.
How would you describe the reception for the Queen and the Duke today?
Well, I had the honour of being part of the Royal Cavalcade, so I was able to see the reaction on the streets as we were moving between venues, people getting out of their cars, waving, the enthusiasm, and you saw the enthusiasm of the crowd here today.
So the First Minister clearly enjoyed his day here at Stormont. For now, though, from a very wet Stormont estate, it's back to you, Donna, in the studio.
When more than 20,000 people packed into the grounds of the Stormont estate to see the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh go past in their open-top car. Mervyn Jess was down among the people as they enjoyed the festivities.
It was the People's Day at Stormont. They came to see their Queen, and she didn't disappoint.
Brilliant. We just seen her coming round there and she looked absolutely gorgeous.
What was the best bit?
Seeing her colours of her uniform.
What was that, lime green?
Yes, beautiful, beautiful.
And did you get a good view?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did indeed.
Absolutely brilliant day.
And not a drink taken.
No,
Just
water.
No drink. Trying to bring it in.
Is that going to change later, do you think?
Yes.
Some people grumbled a bit when the royal couple got out of the open-topped vehicle and climbed into their bulletproof car. But even then, she was clearly visible as the motorcade moved slowly down Prince of Wales Avenue, with the sound of lambeg drums ringing in her ears. It was a real flag waver of a day. For some, it was their first time in the company of royalty. For others, it wasn't.
Well, it's a long time since I was at anything with royalty. I was to do, when the king died, I was to do the funeral on the Mall. But I'd been injured playing football, so I couldn't get my boot on.
I met her in 1966, and
what was that about? Explain how you met her.
I worked in Fulton School then, and we were invited to meet her then, the Duke of Edinburgh, and we had a group of children with us then, and it was really lovely. Yeah.
Is it something when you meet the Queen, is it something you always remember?
Of course it is, yeah, something you always remember, and she's so gracious.
Absolutely fantastic. She's a marvellous woman. She has lived through life with her ups and downs and come through it all smiling.
While this was an informal occasion, it wasn't all wellies and wet gear.
I'm still working at 86, I think that's class.
I think beautiful.
She's going through now. And she tries to please everyone as well, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love her.
Okay, so respect?
Yeah.
Long live the Queen.
Big up respect.
There was backslapping all round for the way the event passed off without major incident.
We obviously take great care in what we do, but you could see the enthusiasm today, and we work very closely obviously with the Royal Household, colleagues in the Metropolitan Police to make that possible, and it was a very special time.
The rain did make an appearance, but it didn't dampen spirits. And when it was all over and time to go home, the people did so with memories aplenty. Mervyn Jess, BBC Newsline, Stormont.
The Queen, the monarch and Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces. In fact, there were two handshakes, one in private, followed by one in public. Our political editor, Mark Devonport, has the story of that remarkable meeting.
An ordinary act of politeness, but one invested with enormous symbolism. A handshake which took 4...
Very nice.
Before their parting handshake, the royal couple were shown around the theatre by the BBC's Mark Carruthers in his role as chair of the Lyric. With the First and Deputy First Ministers and the Irish President for company, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh examined portraits of leading local artists and chatted to some of those featured on the canvases.
The Queen's Diamond Jubilee visit has come to an end with an open-air party for the public. But it was another event which had the greatest political and historic resonance today. An unprecedented meeting and shaking of hands between Martin McGuinness, a lifelong Republican and former IRA leader, and
seconds, yet which could mark a new passage in 40 years of history. Back in the 1970s, Martin McGuinness was an IRA commander in Londonderry. In that same decade, the royal family mourned the loss of the Queen's cousin, Earl Mountbatten, murdered by a remote-control IRA bomb. Today, the Deputy First Minister exchanged pleasantries with the Queen as she left the Lyric Theatre. Slán agus beannacht, the Deputy First Minister said, telling the Queen his Irish words meant goodbye and Godspeed.
It went really well. Yeah. I'm still a Republican.
Martin, how was it to meet